reportedly going back again to Algiers. An earlier report said it might be headed this time to North Yemen, but the latest report is it headed back to Algiers. The hijacked aircraft left Beirut again a short time ago with, so far as we can determine, 110 hostages, at least 85 and possibly as many as 102 of them Americans. All of the hostages being held by two heavily armed members of the Islamic Jihad terrorist group. It all began almost a full day ago, this hijacking of the TWA flight that was scheduled to go from Athens to Rome. There were then 153 people on board, including the two hijackers. The plane was hijacked first to Beirut, then to Algiers, back to Beirut, and now, reportedly, again back to Algiers. During the first two stops, some hostages were freed. During the return stop in Beirut, one hostage was killed. It has been confirmed in Washington now that the American killed in Beirut, his body thrown off the plane onto the tarmac, was a United States Marine. Throughout this seemingly endless ordeal, the terrorists have threatened to kill more hostages. By State Department count, 34 of the American hostages seized aboard the TWA Flight 847 were Americans coming home from a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, coming home to three towns in Illinois, home to family and to church. Some were among those released by the hijackers today. Others are still hostages. All of them, Karen Boris reports now, are the subject of prayers and tears by fearful relatives back home in Illinois.
Frightened parishioners sought comfort in the familiarity of the Mass as day passed to evening. Events half a world away from the peace of these small Illinois towns might have first seemed unreal, but no more. Reality is now unavoidable.
I think everybody has to be numb.
There are so many mad men in the world nowadays that the only thing you can do is pray.
It's a strong family, you know, with the church, 1,400 strong. It's one big family.
As the passing hours diminished cause for hope, hope held firm. Hope is all they have.
Listing of the people who throughout the day were released by the hijackers from
a waiting thing, and that's all. That's all you can do is wait.
I won't give up, and I don't think our parish will either.
If he does not survive, which I pray he will, his memory will, and his faith will.
They plan to keep a vigil here through the night. The church will remain open for parishioners to enter for silent prayer. And in the homes of the hostages through these small towns, friends and family are sequestered, waiting for word.
This hijacking, the third involving the Middle East in the past 4 days, took TWA Flight 847 on a horror-filled odyssey from almost one end of the Mediterranean to the other. Tom Fenton in London reports from stop number 2.
After an entire day in which the passengers had lived under the threat of death, TWA 847 left Algiers with only enough fuel to reach Beirut. The runways at Beirut Airport had been blocked.
We have been flying all day long. We're exhausted. We're low on fuel. The hijacker wants to come down below and circle over the airport until somebody moves the trucks away.
The pilot told the control tower the hijackers were now threatening to throw one of the Americans out of the plane. The runway was cleared and lit. The plane landed with only a few minutes fuel remaining. And then the pilot reported that one of the Americans had been killed.
They're about to shoot a passenger, TWA 847. They are not at the radio. They're about to shoot a passenger. They just shot a passenger, TWA 847.
There were still more than 100 persons on board, most of them Americans, and the hijackers were threatening to kill more. The odyssey of TWA 847 began this morning at Athens Airport. 3 young Lebanese had spent the night in the transit lounge. They carried in a nylon bag that went through 2 X-ray checks, a 9mm pistol, and 2 hand grenades. There were seats for only 2 of them on the flight. The one left behind was arrested and later told police he was a member of the shadowy Muslim terrorist group Islamic Jihad. Shortly after takeoff, the 2 hijackers produced their weapons and forced the pilot to head for Beirut. This was the radio conversation between the flight deck and Beirut Tower as the airliner approached the airport.
He has pulled a hand grenade pin, and he is ready to blow up the aircraft if he has to. We must, I repeat, we must land at Beirut. We must land at Beirut. No alternatives.
The airport is closed, and they are sending trucks.
Be advised, we have no choice. We must land.
The plane landed and the hijackers became frantic.
TWA 847, they are threatening to kill the passengers. They are threatening to kill the passengers. We must need fuel. We must get fuel. They are beating the passengers. They are beating the passengers.
The sound of beatings could be heard. The pleas from the plane crew became more urgent.
We want the fuel now, immediately. 5 minutes at the most with fuel. Now, 5 minutes, or he's going to kill passengers.
We are doing our best. He says if he doesn't get fuel in 3 minutes, he's going to kill an American that he has tied up here in the cockpit.
Fuel was not all they wanted. The hijackers demanded that all Lebanese Shiite Muslims held by Israel be released to the Red Cross. There are some 700 in Israeli prisons. They then released down the forward emergency chute the first group of women and children. Lebanese security men herded into the terminal 17 stunned American women and 2 children.
Well, we had to put our heads down and the hands over the head and stay there for 3 hours under the threat of being shot.
He told us to put our hands on our head and to bend our heads down. And he cuffed me here and turned around and kicked me with his heel here.
The plane taxied past the remains of a Jordanian airliner seized and blown up 2 days earlier and took off for Algiers with more than 100 Americans still on board. In London, TWA officials also headed for Algiers. For security reasons, they refused to release the list of passengers. Some of them were believed to be specially at risk. It was only when the plane was almost out of fuel that it was allowed to land in Algiers. It remained at the far end of the runway while the drama was repeated. Threats to kill the passengers, a demand for more fuel, and the release of 22 more hostages, most of them American women.
They said that they would shoot an American every 5 minutes if they did not get their demands met.
TWA 847 took off again, this time for the tragic events at Beirut Airport and beyond. Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
Let us pause and say that on a breaking and still continuing story such as this one, facts are hard to come by, difficult to confirm. As sure as anything can be in the hurly-burly and horror of a murderous hijacking, 41 hostages all told are believed to have been released in 2 groups. 19 freed in Beirut early today, then hours later, 22 more freed in Algiers. In their faces, voices, and stories, the true meaning of the word hostage and all it implies can be seen, heard, and felt.
And they said that they would shoot an American every 5 minutes if they did not get their demands met. They want 800 prisoners out of Israel.
800 prisoners out of Israel.
And they claim to take, they say that they blew up the American embassy in Beirut.
These men were like madmen when they started. They made us all put our heads down, and they came behind us and smashed us on the back of the head. I still can't. I'm still dizzy. We had our heads down like this for 3 hours. They wouldn't allow us to move at all. They were screaming and hollering.
And then every time they'd say, put your head down, they'd come and push your head back down. They were very, very violent.
You were afraid?
Scared to death, honey. I just hope and pray that the rest of them make it.
Sources in Washington have confirmed that the 1 American male shot and killed aboard the plane in Beirut, his body tossed under the tarmac. Sources in Washington confirmed that was a United States Marine. Most of the hostages on the hijacked plane are Americans, at least as many as 85 Americans, perhaps as many as 102. Their government, as well as their fellow Americans, are worried and angry. But can the U.S. government respond or retaliate? Should it? Pentagon correspondent David Martin reports the U.S. military can either act immediately, bide its time, or, as been the case so often in the past, do nothing at all.
The Delta Force, based at this fenced-in compound, was created for just such a standoff. Terrorists holding Americans hostage aboard a hijacked airliner. But there are major obstacles. One is the 6,000 miles from Fort Bragg to the Middle East. In the 12 hours it would take Delta to get there, the hijackers could fly the plane to any number of different Middle East countries. Very few of those countries would allow an American military unit to come in and storm the plane. No less an expert than retired Colonel Charles Beckwith, the man who led the ill-fated Iranian rescue mission, is doubtful Delta could rescue the hostages even in a friendly country.
Because if the aircraft does land in an area where we have some influence, needless to say, we would put some people there to give advice, to assist where we possibly could. But the actual taking down of the aircraft, in other words, going in and sorting out the terrorists and taking them out, I don't see us doing that at this time.
The only remaining military option would be retaliation after the hijacking has ended, a threat made repeatedly by senior Reagan administration officials. In March, for instance, National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane said, quote, "There is sufficient evidence that radical Shiite terrorists are responsive to Iranian guidance for us to hold Tehran responsible for attacks against U.S. citizens." Retaliation might take the form of an airstrike launched from an aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean against a military or economic target like the oil depot at Karg Island. In the past, senior Pentagon officials, including Defense Secretary Weinberger, have argued against retaliation on the grounds it would kill innocent civilians and goad the terrorists into launching more attacks against Americans. This is David Martin at the Pentagon.
White House correspondent Bill Plant has been standing by all evening long, checking, working his sources as best he can. Bill is at the White House inside now. Bill, President Reagan has been monitoring this hijack drama from Camp David tonight. Short of some military retaliation or action, just what, if any, influence does the President and his men think the United States can have over these Middle East events?
Ben, the sad fact is that there just isn't much influence that the United States can exercise at this point, and people here know it. Talking about retaliation and the possibility, you'll recall that it goes all the way back to the first day of Ronald Reagan's first term in office, when the Iranian hostages were being released, and Mr. Reagan vowed swift, sure retaliation in such a situation, something that has never happened and something that frustrates people around here and must surely frustrate the President as well.
But there are other American hostages in Lebanon. Some of them have been held for quite a while now.
Whenever we ask about that, Dan, whether we ask the President or his advisors, we are told that they are working very hard, quietly, to try and get them released. But as yet we've seen no results. And something like this, which is so public, with so many lives at stake, is obviously even more difficult.
Bill, we've heard various reports that Secretary Schultz, McFarlane, the President's National Security Advisor at the White House, have argued the United States must show some strength with terrorists, and that Secretary Weinberger, the Defense Secretary, has argued, no, if you ever do that, if you ever retaliate or show real force, it will spread the terrorism to this country. Now, so far as you know, is that debate along those lines, and is it still going on?
As far as we know, Dan, the debate still goes on. What this particular incident is liable to do to it remains to be seen. I can tell you that the National Security Advisor, Mr. McFarlane, who was out for the evening, came back to the White House a little while ago. I think he's since left, but was at his desk, seen there, absorbing the latest reports. It's obviously very much in everybody's mind.
Who is with the President, if anybody, at Camp David?
None of the senior advisors are at Camp David. We are told that the President is being kept informed regularly by Mr. McFarlane and by various other advisors, including the Secretary of State.
Is anybody at the White House concerned the President's up at Camp David? Perhaps he should be back down at the White House supervising whatever, if anything, can be done?
They told us the same thing that they told us when the President was at his ranch when the KAL Flight 007 was shot down. And that is that the President believes that he can be President from wherever he is. And certainly he does have the communications links wherever he is to talk to anyone, anywhere in the world at any time. And we're told that he prefers to be where he is, that he doesn't believe there's any necessity to come rushing back here. And I might point out, Dan, that this President has never gone for a hands-on operation, a show of running things. He's always preferred to delegate, even in the best of times. And one thing that they've never done in the Reagan White House is put the President out in front when there might be bad news brewing, such as now.
There were reports, unconfirmed earlier in the day, that the United States, at President Reagan's direction, had sent back-channel word to Iran that Iran had better do whatever it could to make this situation end as well as possible, or something would happen. Has there been any indication that those unconfirmed reports are true?
We've had no indication. We asked the President about this in the Rose Garden earlier today. He wouldn't say. It's entirely likely, let me say, that such word has been sent, but of course secrecy is paramount in things like that.
Thank you very much, Bill Plant at the White House. With us tonight to discuss this still continuing terrorist act, the aircraft, if you've joined us late or perhaps were distracted, the aircraft, so far as we know, is still airborne somewhere over the Mediterranean, is believed to be headed to Algiers. Here in our New York studios is Professor J.C. Hurwitz, the former director of Columbia University's Middle East Institute and Professor Emeritus of Government. And in our Washington studios is Robert Kupperman, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies at Georgetown University. One of Mr. Kupperman's areas of expertise is terrorism. Mr. Kupperman, let's begin with you. What, if anything, can President Reagan and the United States government and the people of this country do under these circumstances?
I'm afraid the President is faced with a terrible dilemma. One is a humanitarian one, and the other is a strategic one. We're going to have to either wait it out, or we're going to have to find ourselves a way in which we can bring a tactical team in, that is, find a government that is willing to allow us to do this. And I've heard Colonel Beckwith's comments before, that just becomes a necessity.
Colonel Beckwith, the man who led the failed American effort to free the hostages in Iran.
That's correct. These are the only real options. To threaten Iran at this point is useless. To suggest that we're going to convince the terrorists just to give up is also not very likely. They have gotten to the point of killing. Most of the governments where this airplane had landed are not competent to effect a rescue operation. It's going to have to be a U.S. team, and I'm afraid that if a bloodbath does occur, that the only choice, because we've talked ourselves into it, will be reprisal, which in turn may lead for the first time for international terrorism to migrate to our shores.
You think it would lead to it migrating to these shores?
Yes, sir, I do.
You talk of retaliation, a very serious move. What, for instance? How could we retaliate?
Well, once it's over, that is the immediate problem of the airplane. There are many targets, whether it be economic ones, such as at Karg Island, or a training camp for terrorists in Iran, all of which are reachable by fighter bombers, all of which are quite vulnerable.
What about Syria?
I don't think Syria is particularly involved in this one. I think Syria has achieved many of its objectives, having I think engineered much of the demise of the American effort in Lebanon. I think probably Iran is more or less acting on its own in terms of influencing what is loosely called the Islamic Jihad.
Professor Hurwitz, you have long studied the Shiites. What is the most important thing for us to know in this circumstance about the mind of the Shiite?
I think in the first instance you have to recognize that these two young men could very well, and we don't know enough about it, could be acting very much on their own rather than under the influence of other governments. There's no question in my mind, I agree with Mr. Kupperman, that these two men are responsive to the kinds of appeals that come out of Tehran. I would not rule out Syrian complicity, but we don't really know enough about it. We haven't had enough information coming to us. So my argument then is that we have to be careful as to how we assess the blame for organizing this particular activity. It's clear that we're stuck with a problem for which we are ill-prepared to deal. It isn't only a question of getting the appropriate team out there with the acquiescence of the government. In Lebanon, this is a situation of jungle. There's no authority. There's no regime that's really in power. In Algiers, we have a better chance because the Algerian government, I am quite confident, does not want to have any serious action taking place in its airfield. I think we have a better chance, therefore, of cooperation with the Algerian government in dealing with this unfolding crisis. Whether that will achieve the result that we want is moot at this point. You have to realize that there are only two of these Shi'is on board. How long can they go without cracking up? another 12 hours, another 24 hours. They will not have had any sleep. Remember, they will have been at this now for 24 hours in just a short time. How much longer can they go? The same is true with the pilots.
Professor, you studied government a long while as well as the Shiite Muslims. Are democratic societies helpless in these situations? And why doesn't you rarely hear of a Soviet airliner being hijacked anywhere?
Because we respond ideally to the kinds of pressures they bring to bear. This very program, for example, I'm sure is being monitored. I'm sure that they have their friends here who are watching what we're saying and doing and reporting back to them. They don't have any effective organization as far as we can make out. This Islamic Jihad is just a title for freedom of action among the religious element. You know, the Shiites are not all religious. The Amal group basically is more secular than religious. The religious element among the Shiis of Lebanon are strongly opposed to what Amal has been doing. And there's been a good deal of controversy between them. So you have a problem here.
Mr. Kupperman, what about this point that perhaps one of the things, a possibility raised by the professor, that one of the things they want is publicity in this country? How would that fit into the strategic balance, the strategic equation? I have difficulty quite making that reach.
Well, I think all of terrorism, Dan, is a theatrical matter. Clearly they're looking for a world stage, and three networks, etc., are providing it. This is again a responsibility of a democracy. On the other hand, it is a paradox. The terrorists have got to understand that there is no conceivable way they're going to get the government of Israel to capitulate. There's no conceivable way, as in past hijackings, to get the government of Kuwait to release prisoners. Again, this is both an attack on sovereignty and also one in which our basic values, our sense of decency, prevents us often from taking really serious retaliatory steps.
What about the question of why this does not happen to the Soviets?
I don't think they put up with it, Dan. I think that they frankly would put an end to it, even an incident, very quickly and maybe very brutally. This is the price we pay, I think, at least a price in part, for being a democracy.
Professor, why would the Shiites aboard this aircraft take it back to Algiers? What would be the advantage for them? Why would they prefer to be there than Beirut?
Well, they're not getting their results in Beirut. They've killed one of our people. They were seeking some kind of immediate action out of the U.S., pressure on Israel. This hasn't happened. They've been bluffing as well as acting, and that's the nature of the game. They'll continue doing this as long as they can hold out. What they might end up with is absolutely impossible to foretell.
Difficult question, perhaps an unfair one, but if President Reagan were here and said to you, Professor, based on your long experience in study, what would you have me do? How would you answer?
I have no answer to that one. I think that we just have to sit it out. I think that we just have to let the situation unfold. I would agree that if we had teams that were capable of operating in various likely spots, that this would be a good precaution. We don't have them in place. We may be training them here, but we don't have them in place.
Mr. Kupperman, would you agree with that?
I would say that our teams, given a reasonable length of time, would arrive. Remember the German Odyssey in the late 70s, in which the Bundesgrundschutz 9, which was trained by the Israelis, incidentally, just followed in an aircraft, the hijacked Lufthansa one. They convinced the Somalians to let them take care of the rescue operation, and they did it very successfully. I think that the United States has a superb hostage rescue capacity, so long as if there is a so-called permissive environment. That is, it can convince the then host government to allow us to go in. I think there would be an excellent chance at that point of ending the matter rather quickly.
Do you expect that to happen?
I don't know. I'm confident that we're going to go in if this goes on very much longer, and if indeed the various governments involved stand firm, at least in preventing them at some point from taking off.
Thank you, Mr. Kupferman in Washington, Professor Hurwitz here. I want to remind you that our CBS News coverage of this continuing hijacking will continue as warranted with program break-ins and interrupts tonight and tomorrow. After this day's events, the hijacking of an aircraft with innocent people aboard, the murder of at least one American hostage, a forum for terrorist demands, the question remains what, if anything, can be done to combat this kind of wanton violence. How can the civilized world fight a guerrilla war with terrorists who know no rules, with terrorists who put so little value, if any, on life, either theirs or their victims? This hijacking of TWA Flight 847, a flight that began with passengers' excitement of seeing new places, of returning home, has become a nightmare for those held hostage, a nightmare for those relatives and friends of the captives. Just when it will end, no one knows. We can only hope it is soon and safe. For now and for CBS News, Dan Rather reporting from New York. Good night.
Munich, London, Beirut. Terror is the weapon.
But 55 people have been allowed to leave the plane. That leaves 53 people still on board. It is believed that those 53 are probably American and probably men. Many of those who were released today, those 55, were women. Among those released were stewardesses. And in interviews with NBC News, the stewardesses say now that there are no longer just 2 hijackers on board, but 12. The stewardesses say that 10 additional hijackers joined the plane in Beirut. The stewardesses also say that the hijackers are heavily armed. They have bags full of grenades, both metal and plastic. They have pistols and machine guns, magnum Colts. They say that one hijacker kept a grenade in his mouth. Now, there are many conflicting reports as to precisely why these hijackers released the 55 passengers. It is believed that Algeria, in its negotiations, perhaps might have succeeded in negotiating the release of these 55. Our NBC News correspondent, Jim Cummins, is in Algiers now. Jim is on the phone live. What can you tell us about it?
Connie, we believe that the release of the women today was part of a deal arranged by the Algerians for the man who was being held in Greece as an accomplice to the hijacking. Once he was returned here to Algiers and boarded the plane, they released one group of stewardesses, then stewardesses and women passengers. Then a second group of about 25 was released, bringing the total to 55. They have also renewed their demands and added a couple. They are demanding that 700 prisoners be released in Israel. And a new demand is another prisoner in Cyprus be released. They are also asking for $10 to $15 million ransom.
The additional prisoner in Cyprus, is that another Muslim Shiite, do you know? Jim Cummins, can you still hear me? This is Connie Chung.
Yes, I can. You'll have to speak up, please.
All right, my question to you is that additional prisoner in Cyprus, is that another Shiite Muslim that they are asking for?
That is not clear because they disavowed any groups that had taken credit for the hijacking earlier today. So it is not clear to those of us who are here. It may be clear to the negotiators, but it's not clear to us exactly who it is they want released. We talked to the U.S. ambassador here, Michael Newland, who would only say that this is a very determined group of terrorists. And he said that the United States has not changed its position, that it does not negotiate with terrorists and make concessions to them.
All right, Jim Cummins, thank you very much. We do have an interview, part of Jim Cummins' interview with Ambassador Michael Newland. He's the ambassador to Algeria. We have a cut of that tape now.
The hostages here?
Well, I think you know our well-known position on that concerning our refusal to either negotiate or make concessions. and that I think would be covered by our general policy.
Policy is not to negotiate those kinds of demands.
That's right. Or to make concessions ourselves.
That was Ambassador Michael Newland, the U.S. ambassador to Algeria. As you probably know, it was Algeria that helped negotiate an end to the Iranian crisis for the American hostages that were held there. So the United States feels that Algeria is a friendly nation and can be of help in this crisis. Now, President Reagan is in Camp David. He's monitoring the situation with the help of National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane, who is getting his information from the State Department. The president says that he appreciates the efforts by the Algerians and that the situation is truly in their hands. The State Department is the key U.S. government spokespeople in this particular crisis. Ann Garrels is there now. She's been there all night. Ann, what can you tell us?
Well, officials here, including Secretary of State Schultz, continue to meet regularly, but they admit there's little they can do but watch with growing concern. The negotiations are in the hands of the Algerians, who've said they want no outside interference. As you noted, the U.S. has confidence in the Algerians that they've been described as masters at this kind of negotiation. But it leaves the U.S. in a kind of frustrated position. Another point, U.S. officials believe that these hijackers are not members of the Islamic Jihad backed by Iran as originally thought. So this means that U.S. pressure on Iran would be futile. And now, with only American males left in the plane, U.S. officials feel the situation grows more dangerous. Greece has ceded to their hijackers' demands, letting go one of the hostages' accomplices. But it's unlikely that Israel will meet their demands. Connie?
It appears clear that the United States is trying to stay very clear of these negotiations and strictly leaving it up to the Algerians.
They really have no choice. The Algerians, as one official said, are proud. They've had a history of dealing with this kind of situation in the past and have said they don't want the U.S. there.
All right. Thank you very much, Ann Garrels, reporting live from the State Department. To recapitulate here, the TWA flight number 847 still on the ground in Algiers. 55 people have been released, but that remains that 53 people are still on board. It is believed that most of them are men, most of them are American. This gives the United States government great concern. According to stewardesses who were interviewed, who were among those 55 released, there are now 12 hijackers on board, not just 2. They are heavily armed with grenades and machine guns. We will have more and full coverage tonight on NBC Nightly News. I'm Connie Chung, NBC News, New York.
This has been an NBC News report. We now rejoin our regularly scheduled program.
Speculation that the Red Cross representatives may be there to try to arrange a solution before the hijackers' latest threats and deadline for meeting their demands. That deadline is now set for 5 a.m. Sunday morning U.S. Eastern Time. The hijackers' main demand is the release of hundreds of Shiite Muslims held by Israel and elsewhere. Among the facts fueling some of this speculation, that among the International Red Cross members on the scene in Algiers is Jean Hefliger. He is the man who recently arranged the exchange of 3 Israeli soldiers held by Syrian-backed Palestinians for more than 1,100 Palestinians and Arab guerrillas held by Israel. The watching and waiting go on, the lives of at least 52 Americans at stake. The hijack of TWA Flight 847. CBS News will continue to monitor developments and will bring them to you on this CBS station as warranted. For now, Dan Rather, CBS News, New York.
This has been a CBS News special report.
I watched a taxi roll by slowly, and suddenly 2 grenades came flying out. Result, 4 dead, 10 wounded. Dining at a restaurant in Algiers, I was thrown out of my chair when a bomb exploded next door. In front of the Sultan's palace in Rabat, Morocco, I saw a man stoned to death. Another turned into a flaming torch in front of strong security guards, and in Jerusalem, a bus blew up 10 yards in front of me. In all these places, there was tight security. In Lebanon, suicidal fanatics drove cars loaded with dynamite into American, French, and Israeli compounds. There's no defense against such suicidal attacks. There is, however, a distinct difference between urban terrorism and hijacking. It is possible to have 100% security against hijacking by rigid body searches and other means. When hijacking occurs, it's always due to human error or neglect. There are also options for retaliation against governments giving sanctuary to hijackers, and most governments agree never to yield to hijackers' demands. That always encourages more hijacking. This is the position of our government and the Israelis, who are currently being subject to blackmail demands. Ed?
David, the International Airlines Passenger Association today, I'm reading here, condemned the Athens airport for sloppy security. What can be done to tighten this stuff up so American tourists can go to Europe?
A number of things. When these packages go through the X-ray machine, if they're shielded, which I doubt anyway, and you can't see inside of them, they should be taken off the moving belt, and a bomb squad or police should open it up. In a dangerous area like Athens, people should be subjected to a body search. Furthermore, the most important thing is if those hijackers get away with it, as they have in the past, the country that gives them sanctuary or pats them on the wrist should be cut off from international society. No planes from that country should get landing rights in any other country. No pilot should agree to fly to that country. If they suffer that punishment, they won't let hijackers get away with it.
So your point is not necessarily whether or not the plane should land in that country, but once the plane lands, what that country does to the hijackers?
Sometimes you've got to let them land to save the people on board, which is what they did in Beirut, and quite correctly. But if the hijackers get off that plane, if their demands are met, if they are allowed to go free, which has happened, then you're encouraging more hijacking. You've got to cut that guilty country right out of the international circuit.
To go back to airport security for just a moment, a lot of people want to know, these people had hand grenades. How could they possibly have gotten those hand grenades on board?
One, their bodies weren't searched. Two, they sent through packages which weren't properly examined. When more than 100 people go on a plane, the people who are looking at the X-ray machine, their eyes glaze over. They should be changed every 10 or 15 minutes. That's what I mean by human error or neglect.
In the case of the demands, what's going to happen now? Is Israel in a bad situation?
Sure, Israel is going to have to refuse, and there are more than 50 Americans aboard. I'm sure Israel will consult with the United States, and I'm sure the United States will back Israel. You cannot give up to the demands of the hijackers, tragic though that may prove to be for those poor souls who are on board.
Okay, thank you, David. While the TWA
Fred and I were at customs when the man got through customs, and he pushed me out of the way, and we knew something was wrong, and he didn't make it through security 3 times. Took off his watch, and finally he made it through. So we were worried when we got on the plane.
We're going to keep our heads down. If you get your head up, they knock you, hit you in the back of the head, keep your head down.
What kind of weapons now?
That they have now. Do you know the bazookas, the big round thing where the fire comes out, the big automatic, the very fast one? Yeah. It's one of those.
Submachine guns, AK-77s.
Did you witness the shooting of the Marine? No.
Handgun in their back, and then they all have hand grenades. One of them walked around with a grenade, and he had already pulled the pin, and he had the pin in his mouth, and he walked around the entire time with his thumb on there, and so it was just, you were just praying he didn't trip and fall or anything like that.
They took everything. We have no wallets, no money, no passport, no IDs.
They treated us very well. They did. They even waited on us. And they brought us as much water and ice as we wanted. They were very fair.
I couldn't believe it until I got off, and I still can't believe it. It's wonderful.
Some of the happy hostages freed today. But the next big hurdle is what happens tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. East Coast time, Eastern Daylight Time, if the demands of the terrorists are not met and they take the plane to another destination, presumably Beirut. What will happen in Beirut? Well, our NBC News correspondent Chris Drake is standing by there tonight, talking to us by telephone. Chris, if the plane does turn up there again tomorrow with the terrorists, the hijackers, and the people on board, is there any way that the United States or anybody else could negotiate with them?
I don't think so. I think if the plane comes back here, then this is where it will all end. First, because it's easy for the hijackers to escape, because no one's going to try stopping them at this airport. Secondly, they'll feel secure knowing the chances of any force attempting to storm the plane must be absolutely minimal, much less so than at most other airports. And, of course, they'd be on home ground, so they'll have the support of their comrades. The general feeling is perhaps that if they do come here, they may allow the passengers to go free, but in a last gesture of defiance, perhaps they will blow up the plane.
The hijackers are Lebanese, they are Shiites. Is there any indication that Amal, the formal Shiite organization there, is involved in this, is sending signals or orders, or would be willing to take part in negotiations if the plane does return there tomorrow?
I think Amal would certainly be willing to take part in negotiations just to show that it is a responsible force, because one has to remember that its leader is Nabi Berri, who's the Minister of Justice here. But there's no formal indication that it's involved officially. But of course it's got so many members who are Shiites, and therefore they belong to Amal.
Thank you very much. Chris Drake reporting tonight from Beirut. Throughout the ordeal of Flight 847, there has been one steady hand and one steady voice, that of the 57-year-old pilot John Testrank. He has been forced to confront armed and dangerous hijackers and sometimes bulky control tower people, as in this instance.
Ground TWA 847, they are threatening to kill the passengers. They are threatening to kill the passengers. We must need fuel. We must get fuel.
I'm trying.
They are beating the passengers. They are beating the passengers. They are threatening to kill them now. They are threatening to kill them now. We want the fuel now. Immediately.
Today in Pittsburgh, Testrank's brother talked about his situation.
Well, I'm just completely disgusted and I don't know how to say it, but I mean, this is just a terrible way for people to solve their problems by, you know, hijacking and hurting innocent people. And I mean, I'm just completely disgusted with the whole business. This is terrible. Okay. Hours will go by, nothing changes, and then something will happen. I think he's the most capable person on board the aircraft to handle the situation, and that's his job, and I'm sure he's doing his job.
For others, instead of anxiety, there was great happiness today. These are the parishioners of St. Margaret Mary Roman Catholic Church in Algonquin, Illinois. They have just learned that their pastor, Father William McDonald, was one of the 3 hostages freed this evening. He had been leading a pilgrimage of 18 parish members. Tonight in Algonquin, answered prayers for the safety of their priest. But of course, there are still many American males, all men aboard that plane, about 50 of them, including 3 members of the cockpit crew. They too are waiting with the hostages aboard the plane in a way, with the terrorists aboard the plane. In a way, they all share a common deadline, 5 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time tomorrow. If the plane does go to Beirut, they know they could be in even more serious trouble. There are some indications tonight that a deal may be in the works. Israel says it is prepared in the future to release some of those Shiite prisoners it is holding. The State Department may be a little bit more hopeful tonight. Certainly, the families and the loved ones of all the hostages are hoping. We'll have full coverage of the developments as they occur tomorrow, Sunday, here on the NBC television network. For now, I'm Garrett Utley, NBC News in New York.
This has been an NBC News special report.
Terrorism here have pointed out that the safest place for these people is Beirut. They have been studying what they call their behavior characteristics, and they say they believe they are not suicidal. One expert on terrorism here thinks that they may do some damage to the airplane, unfortunately perhaps kill 1 or 2 more people, and then disappear into the woodwork as the previous hijackers did. They can easily disappear into West Beirut.
Don, what about this terrible and outrageous situation of the passengers with what the terrorists consider to be, quote, Jewish-sounding names being taken off the plane? Any information as to where they might be at this moment and what their fate may be?
None whatsoever, Dan, but as I can tell you, it has outraged people here. Politicians all across the board are just terribly angry about this. But again, the lid is on, and there's no comment about any information about as to the whereabouts.
Let's pause, and for those viewers who may have joined us late or in some way may have been confused about that reference, it is now confirmed that when the aircraft was at Beirut Airport on the second time, mind you, the plane is on the ground in Beirut now for the 3rd time, but when the plane was on the ground in Beirut for the 2nd time, secretly, nobody in the outside world knew it at the time, the kidnappers and terrorists took 12, we believe, 12 people off the aircraft, people they considered to have Jewish-sounding names, took them off the aircraft, and nobody knows where those people are or what their fate is at the moment. Standing by at the White House is our veteran White House correspondent, Bill Plant. Bill, what is the mood at the White House this morning, and what do we know about what they know.
Well, Dan, the president remains at Camp David. He's coming down this afternoon, but on his regular schedule, planning to stop at a Father's Day celebration in suburban Washington before he comes back here. But the National Security Advisor, Robert McFarlane, who's been running this crisis on an hour-to-hour basis since it began, is in his office this morning. And there is concern here, great concern, over the fate of those dozen or so people who were taken off the plane in Beirut, what seems like a week ago now, on the second stop, as you said, a day and a half ago, because there is apparently absolutely no information about their whereabouts. Now, the other thing that seems to be going on is some effort to talk to members of the International Red Cross in hopes that negotiations can begin. Of course, they're very closed-mouthed about that here, but that is regarded as about the only out, because otherwise, as you know, the Reagan administration, the United States government, has almost no influence in this situation.
Bill, the United States government has consistently and repeatedly said it will not negotiate with terrorists. But has our government, in fact, been in the process of negotiating, albeit long range and through intermediaries, over the last 24 to 48-hour period?
Well, there's certainly been talking, Dan, but the question of negotiation, I guess, is a matter of semantics. There's not much to negotiate because this country certainly can't pressure Israel to release those 700 prisoners which they hold. There have been apparently no talks about releasing the prisoners, or so the Israelis say, and they claim here, officials say that that's simply not an option. So they've been talking, but exactly what they've been talking about isn't very clear. I wouldn't call it negotiation, though.
Bill, we've asked this question several times over the length of the weekend thus far. Have there been second thoughts? Has there been reconsideration about President Reagan keeping to his schedule as it was previously planned and being at Camp David while all this is going on?
If anybody's had second thoughts, Dan, we haven't heard them. President Reagan's long-held belief is that he can function as president wherever he is. And you'll recall that that's happened before. When the Russians shot down KAL Flight 007, Mr. Reagan was at his ranch in California, and he wanted to stay there. It was Michael Deaver who convinced him that he had to come back because it looked bad for him to be up there riding his horse with his little dog frolicking along at the horse's heels. I guess horses don't have heels, but you know what I mean. And so they came back to Washington a day or two early, but the president didn't want to. The president has all that communications equipment wherever he is. He stays in touch to the extent that he wishes to stay in touch and delegates his authority as usual.
For example, today, when the president is at this Father's Day celebration today, who will be the main person in the United States government monitoring this situation?
The National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State will be the two people, as they have been throughout, who are watching this situation on a moment-to-moment basis.
Thank you very much, Bill Plant. The TWA jetliner is back in Beirut for the third time in 3 days with about 40 American men on board. At least 17 heavily armed Shiite terrorists are believed now to be in command of the aircraft. As many as 12 of the original passengers with what the terrorists considered to be Jewish-sounding names have been taken off the aircraft. That was on the second stop at Beirut. We now know they were taken off the aircraft, and where they are, we do not know. There have been reports in Beirut that the tower in Beirut has been talking with the terrorists aboard the plane about the possibility of the aircraft taking off yet again and going someplace else, but nobody knows whether in fact that will happen. Negotiations are continuing, efforts are being made to have some kind of mediation, negotiation, talk again with the terrorists aboard the plane with representatives of the International Red Cross. Efforts to resume conversation between the International Red Cross and the terrorists are now
on his hand grenade. He will land at Beirut. He is desperate.
That is TWA pilot John Testrate, 58 years old, trapped by a young Shiite Muslim with a hand grenade.
We must land at Beirut. We must land at Beirut. No alternative. The airport is closed and they are standing trucks. Be advised, we have no choice. We must land.
The plane, with 104 Americans and 49 others aboard, did land, and the calls from the cockpit became more frantic.
It's not in my hand. They are beating the passengers. They are beating the passengers. They are threatening to kill them now. They are threatening to kill them now. We want the fuel now. Immediately. 5 minutes at the most with fuel. Now, 5 minutes. He's going to kill passengers. Please, sir, please. We are doing our best.
In addition to fuel, the hijackers demanded the release of 700 Arab prisoners jailed in Israel. They got the fuel. They released 19 women and children, and then they demanded the pilot fly to Algiers. As the plane taxied, it passed the remains of a Jordanian airliner hijacked and destroyed 2 days before by Shiite terrorists. This was just the first phase of the ordeal that began Friday morning at the airport in Athens. 3 young Lebanese apparently were able to get grenades and a pistol past 2 X-ray checks. At the last minute, one of the men was bumped from the plane. The other 2 boarded the Athens to Rome flight and forced it to go first to Beirut and then Algiers, and then late Friday night back to Beirut.
We've been flying all day long. We're exhausted. We're low on fuel.
The pilot pleaded that the hijackers' threats be taken seriously.
They're about to shoot a passenger, TWA 847. They are not at the radio. They're about to shoot a passenger. They just shot a passenger, TWA 847.
The hijackers said the man killed was an American serviceman. 10 or 12 more gunmen boarded the plane, and about a dozen passengers with names that sounded Jewish to the hijackers were taken off. The plane went back again to Algiers. The hijackers demanded that their colleague who didn't make the flight be flown in from Greece. And he was. And then in groups, more passengers were released.
I feel fine, other than just the fact that I had to leave my son and my husband aboard.
By early this morning, 104 people had been allowed to leave the plane. It was not clear how many hostages were left on board, about 30 American men. The plane remained at Algiers until early this morning, and it took off again, a 3rd time, for Beirut.
Hijackers asked for 40,000 gallons of fuel to be brought to the plane on the end of the runway. The airport authorities asked the hijackers to come near with the plane to the airport building, otherwise the fueling process will take about 2 hours. At this point, we are not sure whether the plane is refueled or not. The hijackers again asked for food and newspapers, which was brought by them by a small jeep.
Waleed Haradi at Beirut with our latest update from the Lebanese capital. Summarizing quickly now, about 33 Americans, all American men, are being held hostage aboard hijacked TWA Flight 847, now parked at the far end of Beirut's airport. The 17 or so terrorists have demanded food and fuel and have indicated that they may take off again. And our last report was that they had just asked to begin talking again with some representatives of the International Red Cross. The one person known to have been killed thus far as a result of this terrorist hijacking, the man shot on a previous stop in Beirut. That body is now on its way to Spain. We're told that the number of persons taken off the plane on a previous stop at Beirut, secretly taking off the plane, those people with what the terrorists believed to be, quote, Jewish-sounding names, taken off in secret, and it came to light last night that they'd been taken off on a previous stop in Beirut. We're now told the number of those people, those hostages, is 6 to 8. Previously, the number 12 had been used. We're now told it's probably 6 to 8. That's the situation at the moment, Charles. We'll keep you updated as the morning progresses.
Thank you, Dan. We'll be returning to Dan presently.
Least, Robert Peel Sr. was let go because he is in poor health. He describes the situation on the plane as hell. The only known fatality thus far, an American beaten, shot to death, and thrown from the plane, has not yet been identified. His body was flown today to Spain. Meanwhile, in Beirut, negotiations have gone on with the head of the Shiite Muslim Amal militia, and with British and French diplomats and the Red Cross taking part. The principal demand of the hijackers that Israel release 700 Shiite Muslim prisoners. The Israeli cabinet met, but with a news blackout on its deliberations. In Washington, President Reagan flew back from Camp David to meet with his National Security Council. He told reporters it would be in the interest of the hijackers for them to free the remaining hostages. The first of the American passengers who were freed arrived home today. So glad to be home. but so terribly worried about their fellow passengers, in some cases, husbands, sons, fathers, still being held. Good evening. This is the CBS Sunday Night News. I'm Charles Osgood. Throughout this day and night, there have continued to be developments in the ordeal of TWA Flight 847. As he has from the beginning, Dan Rather has been pulling together the bits and pieces of this drama as it has unfolded. And he is still here with us to report the situation as it now stands. Dan?
Thank you, Charles. Sunrise has unfolded over Beirut Airport and on the parked and isolated TWA jetliner, dawn of day 4 of this hijack agony. But before dawn arrived, the airport darkness was pierced by flares and tracer bullets fired by jittery Shiite forces. Tom Fenton at his listening post in London has compiled the day's most important facts and photographs.
Confusion reigned at Beirut Airport tonight. Shia Muslim gunmen were placed on maximum alert as rumors spread of possible Israeli operations against the hijackers. Flares illuminated the sky, and there were reports of approaching helicopters and Israeli gunboats. They never appeared, but the hijackers warned they had taken measures to blow up the plane if it came under attack. On board late tonight, the hijackers released a sick hostage who described the appalling conditions inside.
I don't know anything about the politics, people, but American people on that plane are just about had it. That plane is a big pin. They're exhausted. They've had water and bread for 3 days. All their money's been taken, their jewelry's been taken, their traveler's checks. They have no identification. They have no passports. They have no plane tickets. It's just pure hell on there right now.
TWA 847 touched down at Beirut this morning for the third time with some 30 American hostages still aboard.
The hijackers have insisted that we land there regardless, even if we have to crash the aircraft.
It was almost out of fuel, the crew near the limits of physical endurance, and the plane in questionable condition.
The plane itself reaches sort of physical limits after a certain amount of time. These planes are serviced constantly when they're on the ground, and I think the systems tend to deteriorate over time.
On the other side of Beirut, the body of the American serviceman brutally murdered Friday was delivered to U.S. officials. The hijackers published a message from the remaining hostages to President Reagan. "We implore you not to take any direct military action on our behalf. Please negotiate quickly our immediate release." But the question was with whom and how to negotiate. Eventually, Shia militia leader Nabi Berri emerged as the key intermediary between the hijackers and the American ambassador. As Israeli gunboats patrolled offshore, negotiations were also going on through other Western ambassadors with Israel. The hijackers' key demand for the release of more than 700 Lebanese prisoners in Israel poses a major problem. The Israelis are reluctant to be seen giving in to Arab pressure.
To try and go for the full demand of getting the Israelis to change their policy on security seems to me to be asking for the moon. And these people are ruthless enough to go on escalating their demands. That is why I think we have to be very realistic about the prospects for a negotiated solution.
What further complicates negotiations is the disappearance of 10 or 12 passengers apparently taken off the plane earlier and now believed to be held somewhere in Beirut. The hijackers may be planning to use these additional hostages as their ultimate bargaining chip. Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
Belief runs strong that Israel may well hold the key to any possible end to this hijacking with no more loss of life. Lebanon's Shiite militia leader Berri is reported as saying Israel will soon release its Shiite prisoners and that he hopes the hijack ordeal could end sometime tomorrow. CBS News correspondent Don McNeil is standing by in Israel with the latest developments there. Don?
Dan, I think a very peculiar and unique communication is developing here between Jerusalem and Washington. In the past few hours, a number of very high-level sources here have made one message very loud and clear to me. They're saying, and I quote, Israel will not negotiate any exchange of hostages. But, and I repeat, but, if the United States government at senior levels, namely the President or Secretary of State Schultz, ask for release of the hostages, it will be considered positively. But, and I repeat, but, so far that has not been requested. We have been reminded, I think, by the Israelis that this release of hostages was about to take place soon anyway. But it seems to me that there is a real match going on between Israel and Washington here as to who will take the responsibility for negotiating.
What is likely to be that the outcome of that to and fro, Don?
I can't really tell at the moment. It seems here that the Israelis will not negotiate with the Red Cross representative that we understand is now on the way to Jerusalem. They are waiting for a direct message, a direct request from Washington to release these hostages, release these prisoners.
And so far they haven't had it?
No, they have not had it, they say.
Thank you very much, Don McNeil, in Israel. President Reagan had planned to spend the weekend at the Camp David Mountain Retreat, but he cut it short and canceled an appearance at a Father's Day picnic and came back to the White House in Washington. Our White House correspondent Bill Plant has been covering all the developments since the crisis began. Bill?
President Reagan returned to the White House ahead of schedule from Camp David to review the situation with members of the National Security Council. Asked if he thought Israel should return the prisoners the hijackers want, Mr. Reagan seemed to leave the door open.
This is a decision for them to make, and the decision isn't so simple as just trading prisoners. The decision is, at what point can you pay off to terrorists without endangering people from here on out once they find out that their tactics succeed?
The president wouldn't talk about his options, but he did issue what seemed to be a warning to the hijackers.
I think that we're going to continue doing the things that we're doing, and just hope that they themselves will see that, for their own safety, that they'd better turn these people loose.
White House spokesman said that many options for dealing with the situation were discussed by top officials in the 75-minute meeting, including the use of force, which the administration won't rule out. But force isn't considered likely, certainly not as long as the hijackers are talking. Dan?
Bill Plant, eyewitnesses say that the young American who was murdered first had his hands tied behind his back, was brutally beaten and kicked. How can anybody at the White House or anywhere else talk about striking a deal with such people?
Dan, they're aware of the brutality, but they haven't talked much about it because they don't want to upset these talks that are going on. Their first priority is the release of all the remaining hostages, both those on board the aircraft and those apparently hidden away somewhere in Beirut. The U.S. certainly won't object to the release by the Israelis of those Shiite prisoners if that's what it takes to end this crisis. But officials say that this administration won't ask for such a prisoner release, that would have to be an Israeli decision. Their real hope is that continued talks will produce some kind of settlement that everyone can live with, even if it means some injured pride on both sides to save the lives of the hostages.
Thank you, Bill. Intense talks and negotiations and consultations to end the crisis without further bloodshed are being held on a number of levels, including a host of international officials and interests. Bill McLaughlin at the State Department has been covering this crucial effort. Bill, what about it? Don McNeil says the Israelis are willing to let the 700 detainees go if President Reagan or Secretary Schultz or someone says, let them go. Bill Plant at the White House says that the view from there is that nobody wants to ask the Israelis. Where do we go from here?
Well, that would, Dan, put the American hostages between a rock and a hard place, between the American rock and the Israeli hard place, but somehow, somewhere, a compromise, a face-saving compromise, is going to have to be worked out. And it probably will be worked out through Nabi Berri, the leader of the Lebanese Shiite Amal in Beirut. And I think that's what he's been trying to do all day. The man has been helpful to the United States in the past. He is not an extremist, and he is not, as far as I know, or anyone in this building knows, linked to the terrorists on that plane.
Any indication at the State Department that Berri, when he says he thinks this may well end within 24 hours, is right?
No, they refuse to go that far down. Berri could be overly optimistic. He could be engaging in hyperbole. But it should be noted that the terrorists on the plane want and are apparently willing to give up the Americans once the Lebanese Shiites are freed. So if we can somehow get from A to B, this thing could be over.
What are the dangers at this point? I mean, obviously the people on the plane are in danger, and those people who were secretly taken off on the second stop in Beirut and are off somewhere we know not where are in danger. But what are the dangers of a sudden turn for the worse in the talk stage of all this?
That could certainly happen, Dan, because the people who would do this sort of hijacking, who would kill a defenseless human being, are capable of anything, including perhaps insane frustration. So it's difficult to know, and should also be pointed out, too, that as far as the State Department is concerned, and as far as this administration is concerned, this hijacking drama will not be over until all the passengers, including those who were yanked out the second time around in Beirut and who are now in captivity somewhere in Lebanon, are also freed.
Thank you, Bill. A few of the released hostages arrived back in the U.S. today. Most declined, understandably, to talk to reporters, but 4 TWA flight attendants did hold a news conference at New York's Kennedy Airport, including Yuli Dirksen, who has been described as a heroine by many of the hostages for her calm and firmness during the hijacking. Chris Kelly reports.
The 4 flight attendants provided some of the most detailed information about the takeover and drama aboard the TWA plane. Yuli Dirksen said the hijackers are heavily armed.
They all wear fatigues, military fatigues, khaki-colored and spotted, and they have vests full of ammunition. They have a Magnum 357 Colt, and everybody has a handgun and a big knife, and everyone has a machine gun.
Ms. Dirksen said 4 people she believed to be U.S. Marines were on the flight, and at one point, one begged for help.
Please help me out of this, please help me out of this. And I said, I'm doing my best, I'm trying to negotiate to let you free. Bear with me, I'm trying to get the handcuffs off as soon as I can.
The worst moment, she said, was when one of the men was killed. She also revealed that some of the passengers considered overpowering the hijackers.
There was a man that was willing, and he gave me a little note to pass on to another friend of his, and I was able to. And I told him to please not do anything in mid-air. If there was an opportunity on the ground, we may want to do this. Yes.
Ms. Dirksen said the hijackers ranged in age from 18 to 38. She said she was able to communicate with one of them in German and acted as an intermediary with the flight crew, whom she described as tired and nervous when she said goodbye to them. And Ms. Dirksen summarized the opinions of the hijackers.
They hate us because America is in southern Lebanon and America collaborates with Israel. America is the reason for all evil in the world.
Apparently, Ms. Dirksen's role in the drama meant a lot to the passengers.
By the way, that stewardess deserves a Congressional Medal of Honor.
Getting to Yes, the subtitle, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In. Professor, it may strike a lot of people that what the United States is now in the process of doing is negotiating an agreement while giving in. Is there any reason why we shouldn't think that?
If we're giving in to a legitimate request, it may be. Giving in means giving something you shouldn't give. If somebody asks you for things they're entitled to, I think the first thing in this case is to understand that we are negotiating. That once you rule out military action, our success depends upon influencing the decision of those people. So we got to get very good communication, understand their interests, understand their perceptions. The people they're asking for release, the 700 or 800 Shiite Muslims who were rounded up by the Israelis, in many ways they are hostages being held by Israel. So far as I know, no charges have been placed against them. They've been claimed by informers or others they were anti-Israel in a country which is occupied by Israel. I can understand how that might be. So if the negotiation is all right, Israel, release the people you shouldn't have taken anyway. We have no, United States, I think it's outrageous to say they're being held at our request. We would not tell Israel to go into Lebanon and seize these people out of the villages.
But the people on that plane, the Shiite terrorists, have killed a young American with his hands tied behind his back. Why should we be negotiating with him in any way, shape, or form, and isn't this going to hurt us desperately in the future?
Well, two things. One, I do not approve of the conduct. Obviously, it's outrageous, murder, scandalous. The question is, how do we advance our interests? We advance our interests by coming up with something that's in both our interest and their interest. Something that's better for them than the situation they're in now. We want to change their minds. We have to affect their thinking. Something better for us. And the restraint is do no more than we're entitled to. I think the Israelis went much too far in that 1100 when they pardoned some 75 or more murderers inside the territories in order to get their 3 people back. These people have not been charged with crimes, not been tried, not been convicted. They're just being held as a security roundup to hold them, to threaten the Lebanese villagers and say, don't get rough with us because we're holding these 700 or 800 people.
We have only a few seconds. Quickly, do you think this negotiation is going to succeed?
I hope it will be much better off than the way it might be. I think there's a good chance of it.
Thank you, Professor. The hijack crisis has pointed out again that while the United States can bring tremendous military power into the Middle East, it often can't use that power. David Martin reports from the Pentagon.
U.S. military units are positioning themselves near Lebanon, but for what? These pictures, taken at a British airbase on the island of Cyprus, just 125 miles from Beirut, show men in civilian clothes debarking from a U.S. Navy jet and boarding a helicopter which takes off for parts unknown. The aircraft carrier Nimitz has canceled a scheduled port call in Italy and is steaming east toward Lebanon. A guided missile cruiser cut short its port visit in Israel and is now at sea in the eastern Mediterranean. Despite these movements, a senior U.S. official said today there are no plans to storm the aircraft at this time. Although the process is painfully slow, passengers are being released. Negotiations are still in progress, and it is a cardinal rule of hostage situations that military force should be used only when there is no other hope of saving the hostages' lives. Once the plane landed in Beirut, it became clear a military mission would pose extreme risks for both the hostages and their would-be rescuers, the Delta Counter-Terrorist Force. Delta would be opposed not only by a dozen or more heavily armed hijackers, but also by the anti-American Amal militia, which controls the airport. A military mission would also risk the lives of a second group of hostages whose whereabouts are not even known. Those are the 7 Americans kidnapped off the streets of Beirut over the past year, and the half-dozen or so Americans who were taken off TWA 847 the second time the plane landed in Beirut. Despite all these hazards, the fact that American ships and airplanes are moving toward Lebanon offers clear evidence that the use of force remains an option, although right now it appears to be the worst option. David Martin, CBS News, The Pentagon.
Also with us tonight is a specialist in Middle East politics. Dr. Jacob Hurwitz is former director of the Middle East Institute at Columbia University. Welcome, Doctor. And who are the winners, who are the losers in terms of geopolitics so far?
Well, if we're looking at it so far, I would say that the two silent people in the Middle East, that is the Syrians and the Iranians, have been the great beneficiaries. They didn't initiate the activity. That activity began in Lebanon by Lebanese religious Shias. It is generally assumed that they're associated with Iran. They have received Iranian money in the past. They've received Syrian backing. But they've acted on their own in this case. And the beneficiaries, as I say, are Syria, because they were left out of the renewed peace process, and they want to get in. This is one way of slowing it down. And as far as the Iranians are concerned, anything that happens to the great Satan is of great pleasure to
Meaning the
President
United
Israel.
States.
That's right.
What about the possibility of retaliation? We don't have nearly enough time to talk about that, but in general, do you think that it's realistic to talk about the United States retaliating?
Not at the present time, not in Lebanon. If it were in another area at the moment, I could see our taking some kind of action. You're talking about action to release the...
No, going to the source, Iran and Syria.
No, there's no prospect of that.
Thank you, Professor. In a moment, Charles
Americans at the Marine barracks at Beirut Airport. Last year, a truck bomb wrecked the U.S. Embassy annex in East Beirut. And just within the last week, 3 planes have been hijacked in the Mediterranean, including this Jordanian plane, blown up as soon as it was emptied.
We've assembled a panel of experts to look at today's hostage crisis to see what is being done and what could be done. First, Admiral Stansfield Turner is in WCCO-TV in Minneapolis. He ran the CIA during the Carter administration. Professor Paul Wilkinson joins us from London. He is a terrorism expert at the University of Aberdeen and a security consultant to a number of governments. Here in New York is Professor Roger Fisher, director of the Harvard Negotiation Project, and Frank Boltz, Jr., a crisis management consultant and former chief of the New York City Police Department's hostage negotiating team. Gentlemen, one and all, welcome.
Thank
you. Morning. Admiral Turner, let me start by asking you, from your perspective, how things look this morning as opposed to the previous few days, whether the prospects are any better or worse in your view.
That's very difficult to tell from this distance, but I think they're a little bit better today. The hostages have not done anything more to harm the hijackers have not done anything more to harm the hostages. They seem to be willing to talk about terms here. We don't know what's going on with Mr. Berry and the actual negotiations, but the fact that they are continuing is progress.
Professor Wilkinson, have we, from your perspective on that side of the Atlantic, missed any opportunities so far to resolve this?
I think so. Let me say straight away that people in Western Europe and in all the countries that have taken a stand against this vile plague of terrorism deeply sympathize with America in this situation. It is a grim situation, and we must all do what we can to help America to a satisfactory resolving of this without surrender. In my view, it is vital that we do not surrender to this very serious form of blackmail.
But you said missed opportunities. What
Yes,
do you have in mind?
Well, I mean missed opportunities in terms of efforts to rescue the hostages. In my view, Beirut is the worst place to try and do this. We may yet have to try and do it because it may be that that is the only way of saving the lives of hostages and crew. But of course it would have been easier, more practicable to stage an operation in a relatively stable zone like Algiers.
Such as Algiers.
And of course, yes, I take the view that it would have been better to have taken that step as soon as it was clear that negotiations were not going to bring a release of all the hostages.
Professor Fisher, let me ask you about that. Yes. Do you see that as a missed opportunity?
No, I think that the notion there's a mechanical military fix to the situations. It's influenced by the Entebbe raid, but since then people have been divided. We now have hostages. I think forcing a physical solution is generally a mistake. That I'm not a military man, so if people have a bright idea and can solve it, all right. But in most of these cases, we are negotiating. I think the thing to do is to establish communication as quickly as you can, understanding and saying, of course we'll negotiate. We want to understand you. If we have to change your mind, we want to affect your thinking. Whatever outrageous and illegal murders you've committed, we want to influence you for the future. You want to influence us, we want to influence you, we're negotiating. Then don't announce what you will or won't do in advance. I certainly wouldn't give in because they demand it, but I might do what ought to be done anyway. That is, if they're asking things which they're entitled, we'll say, all right, we'll pay our debts, but not more.
Mr. Boltz, how does that strike you? You've dealt eyeball to eyeball with these situations before.
There's a good point there to negotiate and keep it going. I think we have two terms here. You have the short term and the long term. The military option is an option that must always be there as a final option, as the last option. But I think to negotiate is more important. And I think what we have to do is try to understand what their stated goals are and what perhaps an unstated or secondary goal might be. And we work from that direction.
Thank you both. We're going to continue our discussion. 2 minutes from now, we'll be looking at ways to try to prevent future acts of terrorism, and we'll be joined by former Undersecretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger when we come back.
I hope we will be reunited again soon. I hope everybody back home will pray for us. May God show mercy to us.
Again, and there should be peace between peoples.
Boys, it's time for dear old Mom to tie on her apron and develop a new snack. A snack that's 100% natural, like grapes. A snack that's bite-sized. Like grapes? A snack in various flavors. Like grapes. Low in sodium, low in calories. Like grapes. A snack in a convenient package. A snack that tastes as good as grapes. Whoever invented grapes must have been a genius.
The people who sell and install York air conditioning, they're careful. And that's what you have to be if you're going to make the right decision. Your York dealer can give you a comfort cost analysis with the York Smart Chart portable computer, and it's free. And then recommend not necessarily the most expensive system, but the one that makes the most sense for your house, for your pocketbook. I respect that. York, check your yellow pages.
When the burning, itching, and soreness of hemorrhoids flare up, Tux medicated pads give you soothing, cooling relief on contact. For hemorrhoid flare-up, get Tux from Park Davis.
If you're allergy sensitive, your world is ever threatening. But now there's new relief. Benadryl, the most prescribed allergy medication ever, now without prescription. Benadryl and Benadryl decongestant.
I refinished this beautiful piece all by myself, and I can't even change a light bulb.
Formby's furniture refinisher can make a believer out of you because it works unlike anything you've ever seen. It dissolves old varnish lacquer shellac without stripping, sanding, or scraping. With my furniture refinisher, it's a pleasure to create a treasure.
Homer Formby. No one knows wood as good.
And remember to try my stains. Their unique tung oil formula provides a rich, deep color you'll be proud to show off.
We want to shift the focus of our panel on terrorism this morning to look at how to reduce the risk of future attacks. And joining our discussion are former Undersecretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger and my colleague Bob Schieffer. Mr. Eagleburger, let me ask you first whether or not you see any progress in the way this country is dealing with terrorism, because it's been with us for some time, and if anything, it's accelerating.
Marginal progress, perhaps, but there are still serious problems, one of which obviously is intelligence to begin with. But by and large, I don't think we've moved the art of dealing with terrorism very far, and I'm not at all sure we can. I think it's a very complicated problem. It's a new war we're in, and I think it's going to take time before we learn how to deal with it. I'll tell you one thing we ought to start with, though, is we ought to make it clear to the Greek government that their conduct in Athens was unacceptable. It was either that somebody was bought off or there was monumental stupidity on somebody's part, and I think we ought to say to the Greeks, no more aircraft, American aircraft into Athens, no Greek aircraft into the United States until you solve that problem in the airport in Athens. And I think we ought to do that with any country where we have similar types of problems.
Well, let's talk about that, just that whole business, because I think this bears on this whole business of terrorism everywhere, not just this particular case. They, somehow or another, these people got onto this aircraft, they got through the Greek security, and then the Greeks were very quick to negotiate for the release of their people on board the plane. Now, you say we have to deal with the Greek government, but what do you do?
Well, I think what you start by doing is making it clear there aren't going to be any American aircraft flying American tourists to Greece until they do something about their security problem. And believe me, they'll feel that pinch.
The bottom line is money. The bottom line is money.
You gentlemen...
no, I would say I can agree. I think Olympia will fly a lot of American tourists there. I think it's very important to get the physical security. But this is really... For 25, 30 years, the Shias were quiet in southern Lebanon. Now they feel that their villages have been destroyed, their economy has been wrecked by the Israeli invasion. Here Israel is holding hundreds of innocent people. Last month, Israel turned loose convicted murderers. Now they're holding people, detainees, people they swept up, no charges, no process. They have an enormous sense of grievance. Whether they're right or wrong, they feel that. And we want an avenue for dealing with grievances that aren't as risky as this. We would like them to say, look, if you're getting a grievance, talk to us. We have to open up and politicize this and listen to political things at the political level, so don't get driven this far.
All right. Admiral Turner, you saw this from your perspective of the CIA and the question that Mr. Eagleburger raised before of intelligence. Is it there? Is it better? Is it getting better?
It's almost impossible to expect American intelligence to predict every such incident as this. There have been cases where we've been on the inside of organizations like these and we've thwarted their activities. But these groups crop up almost overnight. You can't get them all. We can do several things, though. We can encourage, pressure local intelligence services to do much more. In a city like Beirut, only the Lebanese can really put out the kind of network that's needed.
All right.
I would also back Larry Eagleburger. Why don't we get the United Nations to establish an international airport inspection authority and have them go to all international airports and declare those that are unsound in their security procedures off limits to all
Admiral Turner,
aircraft.
Thank you very much. We have to go. Gentlemen, thank you all. It's now 5 before the hour.
He told us to put our hands on our head and to bend our heads down.
That the passengers have been taken off that plane and taken to an unknown location in the surrounding neighborhoods of the Beirut airport. Those would be surrounding Shiite neighborhoods. But we do not know what has happened to the 3 crew members who were on board when this morning started. In this half hour, we're going to be talking with Mr. Gary Sick. He's a gentleman who worked in the Situation Room at the White House during a similar crisis during the 444 days when our hostages were held in Iran. Jane?
Oh, well, one of the crew members you're speaking of earlier, Bryant, of course, is
is a man who some say already is the hero of this situation, Captain John Testrake, the TWA pilot. In a moment, we'll be talking with his brother, Roger Testrake.
Let's get the latest first on the hijacking and the rest of the day's news from John Palmer. He's at the news desk. John?
Thanks, Bryant. Good morning. Yes, as you have just reported, Bryant, all of the hostages aboard the hijacked TWA jetliner at Beirut Airport have been taken off the plane and transferred during the night to another location. This, according to Nabi Berri, the Lebanese justice minister, who is also leader of the Amal Shiites in Lebanon. Berri has been negotiating with the Shiites who hijacked the plane. We have more on this late development now from Andrea Mitchell at the White House. Andrea?
John, the White House doesn't know whether to believe Nabi Berri's report or not, but we have been told that he has told the White House that all of the hostages have been removed from the plane. Now, one of the questions remaining to White House officials is whether this is good news or bad. They say it would be very, very good news if Nabi Berri, who they presume to be a moderate, is in control of those hostages, because it would mean that they are no longer under the direct control of the more radical forces and are no longer being subject to being whisked from one airport to another in the Middle East. However, it could be very, very bad news indeed if more radical forces are in control of those hostages, and if they are now somewhere lost in the suburbs of Beirut and in the same basic category as the 7 other Americans who have been in captivity in Lebanon for months and months and some over a year. Now, on the sticky question of Israel and whether or not the United States would say to Israel, would openly encourage Israel to release the Shiite prisoners, the position here from Robert McFarlane, the National Security Advisor today, is that the United States would not openly encourage Israel, as some Israeli officials have suggested. However, there seems to be a lot of room for maneuvering, and if there is some way that the hijackers could drop their demand, then Israel is apparently prepared to release those prisoners, as it has said for many months it would be prepared to do. John?
Thank you, White House correspondent Andrea Mitchell. Let's go back now to our open line to Beirut and correspondent Rick Davis, who is there. Rick, it would appear at this hour that we have an empty plane, at least a plane with all the hostages departed there at the Beirut airport.
John, that is the way it appears. Nabi Berri says, I have personally ordered their evacuation because we were afraid of an operation or a battle in which all of them would have been killed. The evacuation happened after midnight when there were fears of a rescue operation by foreign troops, he said. This confirms a suspicion stated by NBC News earlier in the morning that the hostages had been removed at a time when all newsmen and photographers were taken away from the airport and the lights were switched off, plunging the apron into total darkness. Berri was asked by reporters if they would be able to see the hostages, and he said no one can see them today, but he added he would arrange for a team of reporters to visit them later. Now, he did not say anything about the crew. He only mentioned the passengers on the plane, so that is still totally open. What happened to the crew? Unknown at this time.
So what we're saying is the crew could still be aboard that TWA jetliner at the airport.
It is possible, John. As I say, no one has said anything about the crew at this point.
Thank you. Let's go now to the State Department in Washington. Ann Garrow standing by once again with late developments there. Ann?
Good morning. Certainly one senior official here is talking not about a hijacking, he's now calling it a kidnapping, suggesting that he at least believes that the hostages are out of that aircraft. Officials here do not take encouragement from this fact. They have no confidence that Nabi Berri will treat them any more, will negotiate any more easily than the hijackers would have. They also say that the hijackers, or now the kidnappers it seems, must understand that holding the hostages is counterproductive. Officials say that Israel will not give up the 700 Shiites on demand, but that if the hostages are released, Israel will, as had originally been intended long before this whole episode started, give up the prisoners.
Thanks, Ann. In other news this morning, a perfect launch for the Space Shuttle Discovery from Cape Canaveral. NBC's Dan Molina joins us live from the Johnson Space Center in Houston with an up-to-the-minute report on that mission. Good morning, Dan.
Beirut's top Shiite leader says he ordered the hostages removed from the plane.
I try to bring all the passengers from the plane to outside the airport because I'm afraid something happened to them and I'm responsible now. That's all.
Have any more passengers been taken from the plane?
All the passengers are outside the plane now.
Where are they now?
In one place in Beirut.
When did they leave the plane?
yesterday night after I saw all the boats.
Berry says the Americans are now being held somewhere in the teeming slums of the Muslim half of this city. His men, he says, are guarding them along with the hijackers. According to TWA and State Department officials, the crew and some of the hijackers may still be on the plane. Activity continued around the plane throughout the day. Gunmen wandered in and out, and supplies were sent on board. If Berry's Amal militia actually has control of the hostages, that could be good news. The Shiite leader is, in Lebanese terms, a moderate. He's been conducting the negotiations with the British, French, and Spanish ambassadors here to end the crisis. But Nabi Berry has to watch his step.
Mr. Berry is on a tightrope. I mean, that's his ultimate condition. I mean, you can't be in Lebanese politics without playing roulette with your own life. For example, Mr. Berry cannot seem to be too accommodating to the Americans.
Though Berry's militia holds most of the guns in West Beirut, no one group rules. Pro-Iranian Shiite extremists already challenge his leadership. Their hatred of America is palpable.
Mounting a rescue operation at Beirut airport would be extremely difficult. Just finding the hostages in the chaos of West Beirut would be next to impossible.
The 7 Americans kidnapped from West Beirut, still missing, are a sobering reminder of that. The hijackers are on their home ground here. From their vantage point, it's hard to see why they should back down now. Larry Pinsack, CBS News, Beirut.
The hostages from TWA Flight 847 have in effect become pawns in a fast-developing diplomatic and strategy standoff between the United States and Israel. It seems neither government is willing to make the first move toward giving the hijackers what they demand. Our coverage on this begins with Leslie Stahl with The View from Washington.
The hijackers have established impossible demands. That's the feeling at the White House. And for President Reagan, there was little he could say publicly.
We're doing everything that can be done, and I have no further comments that I'm going to make at this time.
The Reagan administration has no intention of asking Israel to release 700 Shiite prisoners in exchange for the American hostages. That would be making concessions to terrorists, said an official. We would not ask Israel to do what we wouldn't do.
We will not make deals with terrorists and will not encourage others to do so.
Today, for the first time, the White House opened direct communications with the Shiites. National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane placed an early morning phone call to Shiite leader Nabi Berry. "You hold the key," McFarlane said, indicating that Berry has the power and the influence to end the tragedy. McFarlane told Berry that if the hostages are freed, Israel will probably go ahead with its already planned release of some 700 Shiites. The White House had no comment on a letter signed by 32 of the hostages pleading with the president to give in to the hijackers' demands. Today, the hostages' families and friends began applying their own pressure, some by calling the State Department.
I never have anything. It's very frustrating.
I want to make a very strong demand that some positive action is taken towards releasing some of the Shiite prisoners held by Israel, and to stop the political posturing for face-saving purposes.
I think part of us are angry, yet we don't know what's really going on.
Yeah, U.S. policy is not to let terrorism, make our decisions for us. But when you have a family member involved, it's quite different.
Sort of a political standoff. I wish that somebody's going to have to give sooner or later, and I'd be more comfortable with sooner.
The White House is relieved that most of the hostages are now in Berry's custody, but is fearful that those with the so-called Jewish-sounding names may remain in the hands of a more radical sect.
The White House warned that this situation is not likely to be resolved in a hurry. We have to be patient. There was little patience, though, for Israeli officials who say they would release those Shiite prisoners if the president requested it. U.S. officials privately expressed outrage at Israel for trying to put the onus on President Reagan. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, the White House.
Prime Minister Perez and his government insist that Washington must publicly request release of the 700 Shiite prisoners that Israel holds before the cabinet will consider an exchange for the American hostages. The 700 Shiites in question, held at the Athlete prison, are the remainder of some 1,200 prisoners of war moved from Lebanon to Israel in April during the withdrawal. They are not terrorists and were taken south as insurance against Shiite attacks on the Israeli army in Lebanon during the final stages of the occupation.
In many ways, they are hostages being held by Israel. So far as I know, no charges have been placed against them. They've been claimed by informers or others they were anti-Israel.
However, for Israel, the issue is not who they are, but a matter of principle. This country very deeply considers that negotiations of the kind that Washington wants it to conduct threaten its survival, that the Peres government would appear to be weak, especially following the recent unpopular exchange of 1,100 terrorists for 3 Israeli soldiers. But now that the hostages from Flight 847 are presumed to be in the hands of the Shiite Amal militia, the pressure on the government has relaxed a little, and there are hopes a deal can be struck.
It could be a normal trade-off procedure. In other words, it would not seem as if it's done under gunpoint. And that's very, very important for the Israelis.
The news blackout continues here tonight, and the government's real intentions are not known. Prime Minister Peres politely told questioning reporters, "The best thing we can do is to make no comment." Don McNeil, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
To detect communications in and around the airport. Intelligence on the whereabouts of the hostages is in very short supply. Government sources say the U.S. has an almost total lack of agents on the ground in Beirut. The same thing happened during the Iranian hostage crisis, when the U.S. was left without any agents in country after the embassy was seized. As a result of that failure, a secret army organization called the Intelligence Support Activity was created to infiltrate native-speaking agents into countries like Lebanon, where Americans are not able to move around. The suicide bombing of the Marine compound dramatized in gruesome fashion the lack of good on-the-ground intelligence in Lebanon. An investigation determined that a shortage of agents had made it impossible to check out the scores of reports of impending terrorist attacks. Now, a year and a half later, sources close to the Intelligence Support Activity say it still has not sent any agents into Lebanon.
That same investigation also recommended that the Joint Chiefs of Staff develop a, quote, broad range of appropriate military responses to terrorism. If the Joint Chiefs have developed those responses, they have yet to demonstrate them. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
When TWA Flight 847 took off from Athens to Rome Friday morning, there were 153 people aboard, including, as it turned out, the 2 Arab terrorist hijackers. Since this nightmare began, 107 people once again have found freedom. Bob Simon reports now on how some of them view the ordeal.
We do not want to release this man, the hijacker said, but because he is old and sick, we are sending him away. That's why 59-year-old Bob Peel of Hutchinson, Kansas, was taken off the plane last night in Beirut.
I want to go home where I belong. I want to get out of here.
He got to Cyprus today, where after having endured hijackers' demands for 2.5 days, he had to face interviewers and their questions.
Mr. Peel, can you tell us what happened?
The plane was hijacked, honey.
The humor of a man who came very close to the gallows and whose son is still being held in Beirut.
When we was in Algeria, the bombs were being put on the plane and wired. That was countdown point. If you ever have the opportunity, don't take it. That's when you sit and talk to your son, how great he loves you and how much you love him.
Fathers and sons. In Waldorf, Maryland, Richard Steedham waited for word about his son, Robert.
I haven't been told that he was shot. He hasn't been shot. We haven't been told that.
At 3:25 this afternoon, Richard Steedham was told. His son, Robert, a 24-year-old Navy petty officer, had been killed by the terrorists in Beirut. Ruth Hutchinson sat next to him on the plane.
Was that the bravest person I've ever met?
It's already difficult to remember. Just a few days ago, these people were on vacation.
I prepared myself to die. I did not think I was going to live.
You feel so helpless. You feel you have lost everything.
Released hostages have told CBS News they were warned not to reveal details of the brutality if they cared about the safety of the 43 still held captive. So today's accounts may be mild.
It was like a nightmare, and of course physically it was very draining.
From the way these Shiites have treated their hostages, it's clear that in their book, it's not a good thing to be a male American. It's even worse to have a Jewish-sounding name, and worst of all, to be a member of the armed forces of the United States. Bob Simon, CBS News, New York.
That if terrorists struck again against the United States, quote, our policy will be one of swift and effective retribution. But now, confronted with the hard reality of terrorism, what can and should be done? I talked earlier today with 4 former U.S. policymakers, all of whom have had experience in this sort of conflict, and I asked, should the United States negotiate with terrorists? Should the U.S. consider retaliation? You recommend that the Israelis not release the detainees under these circumstances?
Absolutely not. And if they had intended to release them in a few weeks, they should now hold them for a few months. It must be shown that terrorism doesn't pay.
Well, in all due respect to Dr. Kissinger, it's easy to offer advice from the sidelines when you're not in the middle of the management of one of these crises. My own belief is that we have to have patience and give the benefit of the doubt to the president and the people in the administration who are trying to resolve this problem.
By your definition, are we in the midst of negotiating with the terrorists?
Well, clearly there is a dialogue underway with certain elements who may have contact with the terrorists. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think in general it's best to take a position that we are not going to succumb to the blackmail of terrorism. And that's a position of principle which I think the president has stated and restated.
Well, Dan, there's some very unhappy analogies to the Iran situation. Americans are being held hostage by terrorists. The government involved either cannot or will not do anything to rescue them. We don't know where our hostages are, and they've been mistreated. Indeed, one of them has been killed. So it's a very serious situation. I think that what has to be done now is to negotiate but not make concessions.
What about the argument that if the United States uses its power to retaliate, even in a narrow, specific way, it will inevitably lead to terrorism coming into this country, and as painful as it is, better to keep it overseas than to have it coming
in? If we announce that we are so afraid of terrorism in this country that we will not act against terrorism abroad, it is surely going to come here. The only way to defeat terrorism is to fight it and not to concede to it.
Who do you punish? Do you go in and bomb a city and the possibility or probability of not killing the people who perpetrated the crime, but killing innocent children and mothers and others?
I think I would be very inclined to give a private warning to the Shiites that great difficulty will result if any harm comes to more Americans.
In a moment, the profile of Nabi Berri, the man some U.S. officials say holds the key in Beirut to unlock or seal the fates of the new hostages. Oh. Tom Fenton in London tells us more about this powerful leader who himself is now kind of under siege.
This is the man the White House says controls the fate of the hostages. A Paris
Conwell, who said he had been chosen by the other Americans to speak for them, said all 40 hostages were well but under stress. He said he is being held in a private home where conditions are adequate. He said the hostages fear the result of any rescue attempt.
We as a group do most importantly want to beseech President Reagan and our fellow Americans to refrain from any form of military or violent means as an attempt, no matter how noble or heroic, to secure our freedom.
Conwell, who manages the Middle Eastern offices of a Texas-based oil firm, said another concern of the hostages was, if negotiations failed, the Americans would be turned over to the TWA plane's hijackers again by the Shiite militiamen.
Let me say, based on experience, that is something that I would find most unappealing.
Conwell said it was his personal view that Israel should release the Shiite prisoners it now holds.
Israel says it wants somebody to ask her to release those prisoners that it's detaining. The United States so far has not. No one else has. Are you asking Israel to release the detainees?
Yes, I am.
Americans help. We ask the Israelis help. We ask everyone's help because we're in a situation that is dire, that needs to be rectified, needs to be resolved, and only other people can do that. I cannot do it. None of my fellow hostages are in a position to do it.
A plea today from one of the kidnapped Americans being held in Beirut. A plea that their ordeal be ended.
This is a CBS News special report, continuing coverage of the hostages of Flight 847. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
Good evening. 40 Americans held in Beirut against their will. Tonight, they are beginning their 8th day of captivity, a week and a day since the hijacking of TWA Flight 847. 5 hostages were seen for the first time in a week earlier today at a chaotic Beirut airport news conference, and it came to Alan B. Conwell, a 39-year-old Houstonian oil field equipment salesman, to speak for the group.
My name is Alan Conwell. I am from Houston, Texas. I have been elected by my fellow hostages that were taken on Flight 847 and are held as hostage here.
But confusion, not control, reigned.
Hey, wait. Dan.
The Shiite militia members who organized the news conference moved it to another room, and Conwell began again.
We as a group do most importantly want to beseech President Reagan and our fellow Americans to refrain from any form of military or violent means as an attempt, no matter how noble or heroic, to secure our freedom. That would only cause, in our estimation, additional, unneeded, and unwarranted deaths among innocent peoples.
My name is Tom Collins. From Burlington, Vermont. I want to send my very best, my love to my family, to my wife and daughter. We're in good shape. We're healthy. We're strong. We've been treated well, and God willing, we'll be home soon.
My name is Peter Hill. I'd like to address my comments to my children, Nina, Roxanne, and Paul. Tell them that I am in good shape. They need not be concerned. I have every confidence that it'll only be a short while before we're back in each other's arms.
My name is Arthur Toga. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I miss my wife very much. I want to go home. I give my love to my family and my friends. I am healthy. I'm being taken care of, but I want to go home very bad.
My name is Vicente Garza. I'm from Laredo, Texas. I'd like to send a message to my family that I'm well. My son-in-law, which is also here with us in the group, is also well. And I just want for them to pray for me and continue to have faith that probably all this will be over pretty soon.
We condemn hijacking or terrorism of any sort or nature, irregardless of the perpetrator or the circumstances.
Are you asking Israel to release the detainees?
Yes, I am. I am personally. That is something that we have not discussed as a group. But if my understanding in reading the major journalism papers from the States, I understand that the Israelis plan to release the people. I understand that the International Red Cross feels that the Lebanese people should be returned to their homeland. I understand that, well, I feel that most people in America would like to see the anyone in the world unjustly held returned to their homeland.
They're hostages and we're hostages. And, I mean, the world press was up in arms some time ago when all this happened. Why did you guys get on their back?
We condone nothing. We simply say, if any country is holding people illegally, be it Lebanon here, or be it Israel there, or be it America across the seas, let's let innocent and free peoples go home. If a person is not a legitimate prisoner of war or a prisoner due to other crimes, let's all use common sense. Let honesty and faith in your fellow man prevail and get innocent people where they belong with their loved ones.
Hostage Peter Hill's son, Paul, from Boca Raton, Florida, joins us now in our New York studio. Thank you for being with us. Welcome. Good evening to you. How has all this affected you?
It's made me very concerned for my father. I've been fearing for him greatly. Of course, after seeing him tonight, I'm very relieved to see that he looks well.
There's been some criticism about the news conference being broadcast. How do you feel about that?
I think I'm sure it was a very controlled broadcast. I'm sure the terrorists had quite a bit to do with what they said, and I think a lot of good things were said. I think Cromwell made an excellent point. He can't do anything, I can't do anything, but he is making a plea because there are people and agencies and governments that can do something to bring these people home.
When you saw the news conference, did you feel a great sense of relief, or did you feel anger, frustration, or all of that?
That's right, all of that. I felt relieved to see my father. I only hope that the other men that we didn't see tonight are doing as well. On the other hand, I'm still frustrated. He is still over there. They are still over there with a gun to their head, and they are not home yet. And we need to do something right away.
Has the State Department or anyone else in the U.S. government contacted you?
Yes, I'm in contact with the State Department several times a day.
And what do they tell you?
They inform me when news is about to be made public, and they confirm rumors that I've heard. They've been helpful.
And have you been in touch with other hostage families?
I was in touch with a woman who was a hostage and was returned home, and I talked to her, and she had seen my father on the plane, and it was reassuring to talk to her also.
What else did she have to say?
She said he looked in good spirits. The plane had one aisle in it, and he was sitting next to the aisle about halfway down the plane. And she really hadn't spoken to him much, but she does know him as a personal friend, though. They're both from the same area. And she tried to reassure me not to worry too much.
Have you been able to do that?
No, not at all.
Thank you very much for being with us. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Most of the American hostages being held by the Beirut terrorists did not appear at that chaotic, violent, so-called news conference today. More about the others in just a moment.
AT&T is in a little business.
Well, the market is really moving.
We're helping the New England Shrimp Company
Oh, we can lock you in at that price.
use AT&T Watts and 800 service to turn the little shrimp
30,000 pounds a month for the next 6 months.
into big business. We can help your business in ways you never thought of.
Now you're booked.
AT&T Long Distance Services, the better business machine. Talk with us. AT&T, the right choice.
You've been traded, Rolaids. For acid and gas, your performance is not up to tempo.
Sorry, but you're fired, Malox. You don't work hard enough. I'm switching to Tempo.
Our relationship is over, Tums. I found someone better. Tempo.
For better relief from acid and gas, people everywhere are switching to Tempo. Its soft form holds 75% more acid-relieving medicine than Rolaids. And soft Tempo dissolves fast. Switch to better relief. Switch to soft Tempo.
I'm glad I found you.
Only 5 of the American hostages were presented by their terrorist captors and allowed to speak today at what passed for a news conference at Beirut Airport. But hostage spokesman Alan Conwell read the names of all 36 of his fellow passenger prisoners, including the 5 alongside him, and he vouched for their well-being.
We have Reverend Thomas J. Dempsey, Mr. Raymond Richard Johnson, Reverend James William McLaughlin, Jimmy Dell Palmer, Claude Whitmire, Stuart Richard Dosh, Richard Young Moon, Kenneth E. Anderson, Grant Leonard Elliott, James Walter Hoskins Jr., Stevens Caliph Willett, Arthur Warren Toga, Ralph W. Traugut, John or Jack McCarty, Victor Ambergy, Robert James Peel, Blake Sinesvet, William Darris, Peter Hill, Thomas Cullens, George Lazansky, Michael Bradley Brown, Simon J. Grossmare, Vicente Garza, Thomas Murray, Jerome Barzak, Leo Byron, Clinton Suggs, Stuart Dahl, Kurt Carlson, Tony Watson, Kenneth Bowen, Jeffrey Ingalls, Richard Hertzberg, Robert Trotman, Robert Gordon Brown. These 37 men I have met with and can verify beyond any doubt that they are primarily, number one, in good health. They are getting adequate shelter, food, water, etc. In addition to these 37 people who are being well cared for is the pilot, the co-pilot, and the navigator on the plane, but I did not personally meet with them today.
One name on that hostage list, Jimmy Palmer of Little Rock, Arkansas, is the father of Jim Jr. and John, who are waiting anxiously and joining us tonight from Little Rock. Jimmy Palmer is known to have a heart condition and is believed to be a hostage who might be released for medical reasons. Good evening to you, men. Thank you for being with us and welcome. Jim Jr., first of all, and that's Jim Jr. on the left of the screen and John on the right. Jim Jr., did you feel any better knowing that your father was on the list of names read by Mr. Conwell, even though you didn't see him?
Yes, I did. It made me feel a lot better.
And John, what's your major concern at the moment for your father?
My major concern is his health. I feel like my father was very fatigued when I heard his voice. It worried me.
I want to make clear that while your father wasn't at the news conference and wasn't actually seen, that there was a voice recording available during the day. Jim Jr., do you consider that your father, because of his health, is in great peril, or is it the concern that if something suddenly should deteriorate, that he would be in great peril, taking into account that obviously as a captive he's in peril, but I mean concerning his heart condition?
If things should deteriorate, of course, I think that he probably, if he does currently have his heart causing problems, it will cause definite problems. I just don't know what to say.
Well, John, sorry, please go ahead.
Right now, listening to the recording that we had listened to, I'm with my brother. I do feel that he's very fatigued. The whole situation's been very stressful on him.
John, we've heard reports that your father was coming back to this country to have heart surgery. Is that correct?
I don't know whether it would be classified as heart surgery, Mr. Rather. It was heart catheterization. I'm not that up on medical terms as far as that goes.
Well, speaking of medical terms, and there also was a report that your father required some medicine and that arrangements had been made to get that medicine to him. Jim Jr., is that correct?
That is correct. We did get word that sometime during the press conference there was an exchange of the medicine that we had sent over to him.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us tonight. We're thinking of your father. Good luck to you both.
Appreciate it.
Today's news conference in Beirut was a disgrace and a mess, at least from one point of view. From another, it was, with all of its flaws, a blessed event, an event of reassurance and pressure release. Like Beirut itself, a kind of anarchy ruled. Reporters and photographers, some of them were pushing and unruly. Terrorists, some of them were brandishing pistols, shoving and strong-arming reporters, glowering over understandably worried but still remarkably composed captives. In publicizing this chaos, has the press, especially television, been manipulated? Have we all been manipulated by it? Has it brought the hostages closer to freedom, at least by buying a bit of time? Certainly for families of the 5 victims who were seen and heard, it was a relief. But spokesman for President Reagan immediately charged the news conference was, and I quote, a cynical exploitation that serves no real purpose, end quote. And from Dallas, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger unloaded on the press.
It is a humiliation for the United States to have American citizens trotted out one by one, put on television, being forced to say they're being treated well, begging us to do something which from their perspective is absolutely sensible, and from the perspective of their families is absolutely sensible. They get huge media coverage, and I think what the media ought to consider is not to carry anything, including the terrorists. If the terrorists didn't see in this a means of getting their message across, there would be less dog and pony shows like this.
One point of view. The White House and the State Department were busy today trying to appear pretty much business as usual. But this hostage situation...
The public are prepared to cooperate more. I mean, in future, from now on, people will be more ready to endure and support the searches at airports. Airports will tighten up their security. I mean, the security at Athens airport was notorious. Well, let's hope that that will be tightened up. And if it's not tightened up, then the rest of the countries that operate the main carriers will simply have to stop going to Athens. But the effect of this will be that not only the airports and airlines, but the public as a whole, the traveling public, will take an interest in those precautions.
Dr. Clutterbuck, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry it was such a brief period, but we appreciate your comments. When we come back, some images of the last 17 days have lost their lives in Lebanon. They were in that country because they were duty-bound to be so. The 7 Americans who are missing in Lebanon are at least, or were at least, in that country by choice. But this is the first time that ordinary Americans with no interest in Lebanon have been rammed down the gun barrel of Lebanon's misery. It has been some misery for all of us, and it has had very powerful images.
Beirut, the hijacker has pulled the pin on his hand grenade. He will land at Beirut. He is desperate.
Okay, you have no permission to land Beirut Airport. The airport is closed.
He has pulled a hand grenade pin and he is ready to blow up the aircraft if he has to. We must, I repeat, we must land at Beirut. No alternative.
They ran up the aisle. They had 2 hand grenades. One each had a hand grenade, and they had 1 gun.
He told us to put our hands on our head and to bend our heads down and stay there for 3 hours under the threat of being shot.
TWA 847, they are threatening to kill the passengers. They are threatening to kill the passengers. We must need fuel. We must get fuel.
I'm trying.
They are beating the passengers. They are beating the passengers. They are threatening to kill them now. They are threatening to kill them now. We want the fuel now. Immediately.
They told me to pick out the oldest and feeble-looking people and children and mothers.
The 17 adults are all ladies. Many of them have relatives still on the aircraft.
I hope we will be reunited again soon. I hope everybody back home will pray for us.
TWA 847, destination Algiers.
Mr. President, are you doing anything to safely recover the TWA hijacked airplane?
Everything that can be done.
I can't believe that 2 terrorists were able to get on a plane with 5 hand grenades, 3 submachine guns, and maybe pistols.
When we was in Algeria, the bombs were being put on the plane and wired. That was countdown point. If you ever have the opportunity, don't take it. That's when you sit and talk to your son how great he loves you, how much you love him.
Beirut approach, TWA 847. Our situation is desperate. The hijackers are absolutely determined that they shall land in Beirut.
The worst moment was when we had to land in Beirut and they had turned the lights off on the runway and barricaded the runway.
I implore you, sir, to cooperate and allow us to land this aircraft before we crash.
The worst one when I heard the shot. And the man was thrown out of the aircraft from the front door.
Myself, I'm not government. I am member in government. I try to do my duty. I mix myself in this affair to save the life of 40 Americans.
They removed the other passengers and took them away, and the 3 of us have been on the aircraft since then.
I'm fine, and the message to my family is they can worry a little, but not too much. Our treatment has been tolerable.
Please. Sit down, please. Please, gentlemen, please be quiet and act like gentlemen.
I'm as frustrated as anyone. I've pounded a few walls myself when I'm alone about this. It is frustrating.
Many in our group have a profound sympathy for the cause or for the reasons that the Amal have in saying, Israel, free my people.
Let's release them. Let's set up a schedule so we can get the hell out of here.
I still have hopes, but my hopes are dim.
I try to be, to finish this affair, to save the human being life.
Evidently, the arrangements are that we will be driven to Damascus. And the word that the guards have been giving our men this morning is today Damascus, tomorrow USA.
Reports that they were waiting for a plane. Well, we heard earlier this morning that the TWA jet was said to be unfit to fly, so that may have well been the cause of the delay.
We have decided to send the 39 American hostages to Damascus.
Thank you. Thank you.
Leo Barra. Here.
Kurt Carlson.
Here.
Alan Conwell. Here. Thomas Collins.
Here.
It's good to be in Damascus. It's good to be en route home. Words are inadequate to try to express our feelings of the gratitude, our feelings of the excitement. We're all eagerly anxious to get home and hug our loved ones and touch American soil again, and hopefully we can take home with us the good things of this terrible experience and use it for constructive purposes in the time that we have left on this earth.
Here we go.
As many of the hostages have said as they left Damascus today, and even as they left Beirut, to quote one of them, it has been an education. Virtually all of them, I think all of them, before they left Beirut, were given Qurans, the Muslim holy book, by their captors, which is, for those of you who have not read it, something of an interesting document on the ways of Islam, not only religiously, but in terms of the totality of life they lead. To answer the question of many people, we now expect the C-141 carrying the passengers and crew from TWA 847 to arrive at Frankfurt in West Germany in about 3 hours from now. And to repeat what we said earlier, we will certainly be back on the air when that happens. One thing about all of the television coverage of the hostages themselves, all sorts of psychologists remind us at a time like this that we should not read too much into the appearance of the passengers, formerly hostages, on television. One psychologist reminded us earlier today that the 52 men and women who were held in Iran for such a long period of time are all now leading productive lives. And two final thoughts, if I may. We need no reminder that one person, Robert Steedham, died in this hijacking. But this is the first crisis for America in many in which more people didn't come home from Lebanon in coffins. Remember the 2 attacks on the embassies and the ones on the Marines. In this ordeal, the villains have certainly not become saints, but they've all made it clear we need better to understand the nature of terrorism, and certainly we can no longer go on ignoring the Middle East. I'm Peter Jennings. I hope you'll continue to join us for our continuing coverage of the return home of the passengers from TWA Flight 847.
As the hijackers, hooded and looking like a cross between the devil and a kiddie's TV program. The press and television covered it on a vast scale, this confrontation between the mightiest nation and a few dozen slum kids with explosives. Amal leader Nabi Berri got his point driven home in millions of American living rooms, several of the hostages themselves backing him up. And the hijackers who killed one American, beat up others, and terrorized more than 100, it looks like they'll get what they were after. The U.S. and Israel have gone to great lengths to disavow any link between freeing American hostages and releasing Lebanese prisoners. But it's become all too evident to the discomfort of us all that these days, more and more, terrorism does pay. Richard Blystone, CNN, Beirut.
Vice President George Bush is expected to arrive in Frankfurt in just a few minutes to greet the returning hostages. The hostages themselves should arrive at the Rhine-Main base in about half an hour. We'll have live coverage of both arrivals in the next hour of our continuous coverage of the release of the American hostages. Stay with us.
And I'll never eat.